Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to the final poster sessions of Nature-Based Solutions Digital Dialogues 2020. The topic for this section reflects the content of our two panel sessions today, with a particular focus on governing nature-based solutions. And so it is great pleasure that I introduce and then hand over to Alex Rosson. Alex has been conducting and applying social and ecological research over the past 7 years in conservation science and nature-based solutions. He manages and collaborates the delivery of research and knowledge exchange outputs for the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative. He is particularly interested in interdisciplinary research at the nexus of biodiversity, development, and climate change issues, and is currently focusing on capacity strengthening to bridge research, policy, and practice gaps. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Natalie. It's wonderful to be here. I will just start sharing my screen. And there we go. All right, so I am very delighted to welcome you all to our final poster session of these digital dialogues. The previous session highlighted the importance of innovative and effective governance across scales. And we will continue on this theme with a wonderful lineup of 5 posters from around the world focusing on the governance of nature-based solutions. The posters in this session cut across scales from local decision-making and implementation processes for nature-based solutions in rivers, cities, to the national and international policy landscapes, including the role of nature-based solutions in national climate adaptation planning and progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The poster session will be slightly shorter than the previous poster session, so each will have 5 minutes. We'll have a chance to answer a question or two, and hopefully there will be more time at the end to discuss some of the issues. So do submit your questions live via the Q&A, and for you tweeters, please use the hashtag indicated on the screen. You can also download the posters on the website that you see. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our first presenter of the day, Mario Breilinger from Leibniz University in Germany. Mario, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm very pleased to present you some insights from our participatory multi-criteria analysis, which we applied for a river restoration case study in Germany. And our aim was to explore how a group of government representatives judge and discuss the suitability of different river restoration options as nature-based solutions. And yeah, the concept of nature-based solution is understood here as the outcome of a collective decision-making process. So usually a group of actors chooses an action which should meet the common criteria of nature-based solutions. First, an action must address a well-defined problem of social relevance. Second, it must contribute to ecosystem processes and biodiversity. And third, it must be implementable. We assume that these criteria are perceived and judged differently by each actor, depending on their knowledge, beliefs, values. And yeah, consequently, each actor might prefer different actions as nature-based solutions. And agreeing in one action as nature-based solutions can be quite difficult, as well as depends on how the process of decision-making is structured. Yeah, now our research interest was to learn more about the preferences of government representatives for nature-based solutions that address a concrete problem they actually deal with. So we therefore applied a participatory multi-criteria analysis with an existing group of representatives who work for different water authorities, but have the common goal to enhance the Lahn River in Germany ecologically. The problem they faced was to find a river restoration option for a wire, which best satisfies different stakeholder interests. Yeah, first, we wanted to know which river restoration option each representative belief is most suitable as nature-based solution. So we focused first only on the beliefs on the representatives, which we define what a person holds to be true or what is certain or not. And secondly, we wanted to know how the preferences of each representative change when personal values are also taken into the account. And by values, we mean what a person holds to be important. With the aid of the participatory multi-criteria analysis, these representatives initially had to judge the performances of 4 alternatives based on 9 criteria. The alternatives were doing nothing, A0, implementing small ecological measures, that's A1, creating a near-natural bypass channel, A2, and restoring a cut-off meander, A3. And the criteria we used include 6 stakeholder objectives, such as flood protection, sports and leisure boating, and biodiversity, as well as 3 implementation constraints, such as implementation costs and acceptance. So the initial task, the subjective judgment of the criteria performance for each alternative, gave us some indications of the beliefs. Additionally, the representatives had to rate these 9 criteria. So which criteria do they find more or less important? And this gave us information about their personal values. What we found out so far is that the doing nothing alternative and also the small ecological measures, so A0 and A1, are more preferred when we ignore the personal values of the representatives. So if we excluded them from the analysis. This is illustrated here on the left diagram on the left-hand side. But when we consider the personal values, then in tendency, alternative A2 and A3, so larger restorations, are more likely to be preferred. On the right-hand side diagram, we excluded beliefs from the analysis in which the representatives were unsure about the performances of the alternatives. So in those cases, decisions are in favor of higher degrees of restoration interventions. To sum up, we observed that in particular, the beliefs were a very critical factor in the decision-making process on nature-based solutions. The representatives believed either that a larger restoration had more negative performances on certain criteria, for example, on boating or agriculture and in terms of the feasibility, or they had hardly knowledge about the multiple performances of restoration interventions. Yes, I hope you could follow my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mario. Very briefly, a couple of related questions in relation to the application of those findings. Can you very briefly talk about the conclusions you draw from this study and their relevance for policy, practice, and governance, but perhaps focus on one of these, such as how to include personal values into decision-making in practice? Thank you.
Yes, sure. I think if we want to implement large-scale nature-based solutions, decisions on suitable actions should not rest solely on individual beliefs of government representatives, because decision-making on nature-based solutions will often involve conflicting beliefs and values on suitable actions, and there will often be a lack of information regarding how suitable actions affect and contribute to nature and people. So what is important is how the administrative decision-making process can involve different stakeholders with their beliefs and values, integrate reliable information from science and also local knowledge. And I think the most important thing is to enable social learning between the actors, so especially when reliable information is not available.
Thank you, Mario. That's fantastic. I would now like to move on and introduce the next presenter, Sareh Moussavi from l'Université Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium. Sareh, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Today I'm going to talk about the synergies of interdisciplinary urban planning and landscape design in creating nature-based cities. This research is being conducted with my colleague, Dr. Judy Bush from the Department of Urban Planning at the University of Melbourne. So why these two particular disciplines, first of all? We all know that the built environment is responsible for significant environmental impacts. Cities are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time, they are places where most of the global population reside, with experiencing a higher impact of climate change. Urban planners and landscape architects are two key players, among other built environment professionals, obviously, in shaping and designing our cities and defining the spaces that can be allocated to nature in our cities. So if we want to move towards nature-based cities, these two are important actors in that process. There are a number of obviously challenges when we talk about planning and designing nature-based cities in the 21st century. Some of them include, for example, balancing conflicting needs in the built environment and the needs of those that are less vocal or less are visible. And this can be seen as biodiversity, so non-human species, but it can also be seen as less vocal human or citizens that often don't get a voice to kind of contribute to decision-making processes. Other challenges that we have been talking a lot about in the last 3 days are responding to climate change and the uncertainties embedded in these impacts. So how to count basically for uncertainties when we are putting in place things that include natural systems and living systems. So we were interested to actually look into complementary roles or contributions of these two disciplines in operationalizing nature-based solutions for climate change adaptation. Just on a side note, this research also came out of running an interdisciplinary studio subject at the University of Melbourne School of Design between urban planning students and landscape architecture students and co-teaching with Judy. We have reflected on some of our observations looking at how these disciplines actually interacted by using a lens through, solving a complex environmental issue through the lens of a nature-based solution. So design and the role that designers can play, they obviously bring creativity to materialization of nature-based solutions. They are trained to design with nature and they carry ecological literacy often. The know-how of how ecosystems function and change over time, but also they bring a focus to ecological aesthetics and appreciation for ecological aesthetics and processes in our cities. They actually also focus on synergies between nature and culture by a focus on recreational aspects of NbS. But they lack regulatory status and lack mechanisms to impact or influence policy and politics. They also don't have a major drive for public participation because it's very designer-centered as a process. On the other hand, urban planners bring functional focus to land use. They address trade-off and competition. They often go through participatory approaches and provide regulatory status to decisions. However, they lack connections and expertise with ecology and natural dynamics. And often there is a tendency toward path dependency and reinforcing the fact that there is a potential lack of its institutional innovation. So we can already see that there are some complementary contributions that these two, if working together in an interdisciplinary manner, can actually bring to integrate, for example, creativity with regulatory status or develop innovative approaches to engage with temporality and change. An interesting example of this is, for example, the development of the Green Factor tool that the City of Melbourne has just recently launched, where landscape architects and urban planners, in collaboration with obviously ecologists and engineers and other professionals, came up with this decision-making tool to kind of maximize the amount of vegetation in new development projects and kind of make it mainstream it in regulatory processes. we have identified performative thinking as a bridge that can be integrating these two disciplines together. Defined as processes or approaches that focus on the performance of nature-based solutions and how they function and change as opposed to how they look like. So performative thinking has come out mostly from the design literature, and it focuses on, for example, using performative testing through prototyping or in situ modeling, in situ monitoring, and then adaptive management of systems that we put in place. So basically what it does, it provides a mechanism for data-driven and evidence-based planning and design. It enables adaptive management and a greater engagement with uncertainty and temporality. A great example is the climate proofing social housing project, for example, in London, where designers and engineers actually flooded an implemented rain garden to test whether and how it's going to perform if there's going to be a flood, a 1 to 100 year flood. So they simulated that flood event and tested the performance of their own design, which is an interesting way of kind of using a safe to fail experimentation for performative testing. And also if we use, for example, digital models or scenario modeling, that also increases the chance of higher and a more effective visualization and effective participation with the public. So how would it look like in practice? We suggest that design-based planning can be a very important approach, bringing designers from the get-go in planning and policy creation, and also co-create and co-design approaches with the use of strategies such as scenario modeling can also help. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Just very quickly, in relation to the decision-making tool, given your experience, me and along with one of the participants, one of the attendees, would like to get you to elaborate a little bit of how you see improvement for these decision-making tools that use performative thinking. Are there any areas in which they can be improved? Thank you.
So I would say that this is a kind of a very new and recent concept, performative testing and performative design thinking. But some of the things that designers, for example, are using are tools that often engineers use to say kind of test their ideas or test their design through different scenarios of climate impacts or climate projections, and then use that to kind of like use it as a feedback loop to then adapt their design process or adapt their thinking by learning what came out of that, whether it was failure of the system or whether it was a kind of like a direction for improvement of systems. So I would say a lot of tools that, for example, engineers use can come to play because we are working with scientific data. We are working with projections that are being updated every single day. So we really need to keep up with this amount of scientific data to be able to think in that performative way of thinking of these nature-based systems.
Thank you. That is fascinating. And now let's move on. Our next presenter is Annika Turton from the International Institute for Sustainable Development in Canada. Annika, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone from Canada. So I'd like to use my 5-minute poster presentation to highlight with you some key findings from a review and analysis that we have undertaken, or it was undertaken by the NAP Global Network, which is a global initiative to support countries' adaptation planning processes, and it's housed at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. So according to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there are currently 120 countries that have either initiated or are currently in the development of their national adaptation plan process. So for context, the NAP process is a strategic process that enables countries to identify and address their medium and long-term priorities to adapt to climate change. So given the current momentum and growing interest of nature-based solutions and their potential to deliver cost-effective adaptation solutions, in the form of ecosystem-based adaptation. We reviewed the 19 NAP documents that have been submitted by countries to the UNFCCC by March 2020 to get a better understanding of the extent to which countries have been integrating ecosystems and ecosystem-based adaptation measures as a tool and in their NAPs, and potentially identify opportunities to strengthen the uptake of those ecosystem-based adaptation measures, but also the quality. And here I should really mention that it wasn't our intention to assess the overall quality of NAP documents. Obviously, they're very country-driven and individual, or even the EBA measures. The objective was really to identify gaps, trends, and opportunities in countries' approaches that they're taking right now, and drawing lessons from that for future adaptation planning and ongoing NAP processes in other countries. So the table you see here aims to provide really the visual overview of these results, and I will just highlight 5 key findings from it. First, almost all NAP documents identify ecosystems. I shouldn't say almost all NAP documents identify ecosystems either as a standalone sector, with a couple exceptions that identify ecosystems as cross-sectoral as well. So while almost all NAPs also identify ecosystem services, we found that the contributions and the societal benefits those ecosystem services provide to people are very much implied in the document and discussed in very generic terms. And then second, the effort to assess ecological vulnerabilities has become a standard feature in all NAPs. However, they put a large focus on the ongoing and anticipated degradation of ecosystems rather than their role in adaptation options. So as an example, while most countries include EBA measures to reduce the vulnerabilities of ecosystems and people, when you actually look at the measures identified in more detail, it doesn't necessarily appear that they are intentionally designed to address specific climate risks and deliver adaptation outcomes, but they resemble rather business as usual conservation measures. And then third, we found that efforts to monitor EBA are still very limited. Only a few countries have actually started to identify time-bound, evidence-based measures or targets for EBA. And then fourth, which we found very interesting, is that the NAPs that have been submitted by Latin American countries showed a much stronger treatment of ecosystem services. Some even included the whole framework for EBA, and they all connected their NAP to their national biodiversity strategy. We think this is likely due to the fact that there are a lot more EBA projects in that region for a long time, and it shows that these projects are actually instigating policy change at the national level. And then last, we found that forests, freshwater, coastal marine areas were the ecosystems most commonly identified as vulnerable, and also had the most EBA measures related to them. In comparison, mountain regions or mountainous ecosystems and deserts were very underrepresented. And if they were identified as vulnerable, they often were not necessarily, vulnerabilities were not necessarily addressed through EBA measures. So this is really just a snapshot of the analysis I presented. I hope you found this insightful, and the full results of the review will be made public as part of a larger knowledge product later in October this year. And you can also find my contact information on the poster. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. That was fantastic. So there are a few related questions here. You said one point that caught my attention, where you said a lot of what's in there reflects business as usual conservation. Can you elaborate on why then specifically the NAP process provides a strategic opportunity to advance the EBA agenda?
Mm-hmm. Well, we know already for like years of experience on ecosystem-based adaptation that EBA is supposed to be part of a strategic adaptation or larger adaptation planning process, which I think then creates that framework to really focus on producing adaptation outcomes right from the beginning. And then also, importantly, we always talk about we need to scale up EBA or nature-based solutions for adaptation. And the NAP process likely provides a framework that can be used in terms of accessing and identifying financial resources specifically, but most important, it offers the opportunity of a multi-sectoral approach, because part of the NAP process is that it's undertaken in a multi-sectoral way and also across levels of governments, which really provides an opportunity to integrate EBA and ecosystems or nature-first solutions across sectors, aside from our traditional sectors of water, agriculture, we're thinking of when we talk about EBA, but infrastructure, transport, urban areas. And then, of course, the national to the local level, the involvement of several levels of government that are contributing to the NAP process provides another opportunity to integrate EBA into different levels of government.
Thank you. Very briefly, just one more question. Can you elaborate on why only 9 countries have currently have NAPs?
19, you mean?
Yeah, I believe.
Yes. So the NAP process is ongoing in 120 countries, according to the least developed countries group from under the UNFCCC. However, only 19 countries, actually of today, I think it's 20 or 21, have submitted an actual NAP document to the UNFCCC. That doesn't mean that there are only 19 NAP processes going on, but these countries have finalized their NAP and have submitted it. It's a rather longer process, and some countries are faster than others in initiating the NAP process and also initiating financial resources. But these are 19 documents, but we have 120 countries where the NAP process is ongoing. And I think this research provides also a good opportunity now to influence these ongoing processes to improve the quality of EBA measures and also upscale the integration of ecosystems in NAP processes.
Thank you, Anika. That's extremely interesting and very promising. I'd like to move on now to our next presenter. And we have with us Allison Fairbreast from the University College of London. Allison, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay.
I'm hoping that you can see me.
Can well, I can't. But your poster is visible and I can hear you.
Okay, fine.
Oh, now I can see your video. Yes, please.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Okay. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about some work that's coming out of a collaboration between a team, including myself at University College London, with the UN Environment Programme. So UNEP in 2019 published a Measuring Progress report, which was a stocktake of the environmental dimension of the SDG indicators, and classified 93 of the over 200 SDG indicators as being environmental. They also looked at data availability and methods supporting them and found them somewhat lacking, and I will go into that in more detail. For 2021, they are preparing a second iteration of the Measuring Progress work, which will be looking at how environmental actions and nature-based solutions in countries seems to be translating into environmental impacts. The work that UCL have been leading is forming the analytical backbone of this work. So we are taking a data-driven approach to identifying relationships between SDG indicators that are related to nature-based solutions and the small number of SDG indicators which track the state of the environment. So this is a global analysis. We're using the SDG indicator datasets that cover all the UN member states. Using scientific evidence, we're identifying potential relationships between nature-based solutions and the environment and seeing what can be investigated in terms of how these are represented by the indicators in the SDGs. We are using correlation analysis to test these relationships between pairs of indicators that relate to nature-based solutions and the state of the environment. And then using these results to try and identify those countries that seem to be doing well and are outliers in terms of translating nature-based solutions into improvements in the state of the environment.
So the graphic in the middle of the poster illustrates the preliminary results that we have produced. So we identified almost 70 potential relationships between the SDG indicators, the 19 SDG indicators that are related to nature-based solutions, and the 11 SDG indicators that track the state of the environment. The SDG indicators that are related to nature-based solutions tend to be focused on protection and management of the environment. Coming back to the data issue, this kind of links to Colin's talk earlier, where we are finding that a lot of the environmental SDG indicators are not supported by agreed methods or systematic data collection by countries. So a large proportion of the relationships that we identified as being possible to investigate using the SDG indicator framework were not possible due to these data limitations. We were able to investigate 16 pairs of indicators that represent relationships between nature-based solutions and the environment. Some not surprising significant relationships have come out of this work. For example, indicator 15.1.2 on the protection of key freshwater biodiversity areas is positively correlated with 6.6.1 on water ecosystem extent. Other interesting non-significant relationships, such as the indicator on marine protected areas and the indicator on species extinction risk. A large number of the SDG indicators are actually aggregates of sub-indicators. And one unusual result that's come out of this is opposing relationships between sub-indicators and indicators of the state of environment. For example, the sub-indicator of 15.2.1, which is proportion of forest area within legally established protected areas, and another sub-indicator of proportion of forest area with a long-term management plan, have opposing relationships with the indicator on endangered species. The next stage of this work is tying up this more quantitative analysis and moving into a qualitative policy assessment with experts. So using the results of this analysis, we are now trying to identify outlier countries that seem to be translating successfully nature-based solutions into impacts on the state of the environment. So the little graph in the bottom left-hand corner illustrates that the United Kingdom seemed to be an outlier in terms of the number of plants that they have conserved genetic resources for, and also is one of the few countries that is reporting a decrease in the extinction risk to their domestic species. So it's results like these that we are planning to investigate with experts on the topic and in these countries to try and understand what is the policy landscape that might be acting as a good environment to translate nature-based solutions into improvements in the environment. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Allison. That's fascinating. And indeed, it links back to a theme in the previous session on measurements and qualities, not just quantities. So in relation to that, I'm really interested, but please only keep this brief, but it's, I'm interested in the, this second phase where you deal through a qualitative approach. You engage experts in the policy assessment phase. You know, you learn from countries where this has worked. And can you just briefly explain that to us a little bit?
Yes, of course. So the project has already formed an expert drafting group, which are mainly experts that have been invited through UNEP's network. I think Natalie Seddon actually attended our most recent meeting of that expert drafting group. So we'll now start to reach out to that expert drafting group based on their expertise and the results of the analysis to find people that are able to really dig into why we're seeing these results in these particular countries. And I'd very much like to encourage anyone in the call today that feels like this is something that they could add to and would like to be involved to definitely contact me, as we are actively going into this new phase of the project.
Thank you, Allison. That's fantastic. I think, yeah, well, hopefully we have a bit more time to discuss this at the end, but I'd like to move on now to our last presentation. And it's a pleasure to welcome a fellow Oxford colleague, Mark Herons, from the Environmental Change Institute right here in Oxford. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks very much for the opportunity to share my poster. Yeah, I wanted to take a bit of a step back and look at the bigger picture, really, and just reflect a bit on the governance of nature-based climate solutions, or natural climate solutions, NCS. And I'll start by reflecting on a couple of key threads on discourse, knowledge, and institutions, and then outline some ideas around how we might respond. So I think the wider climate discourse is really becoming increasingly carbon-centric and crisis-orientated. And I think this is somewhat problematic because it narrows the scope of issues that require solving, or the problems that require solutions. For example, sidelines inequality. And it also emphasizes an emergency politics over more deliberative and democratic forms of politics. With respect to the knowledge, there's really been, I think, an emphasis on quantifying the global mitigation potential of natural climate solutions. And these kind of more modeling-based approaches tend to sideline key governance issues such as land rights or the contested values that we've heard so much about this conference. And it's often based on, or reinforces, quite a partial form of knowledge. As Figure 1 demonstrates, there's a real dearth of evidence on nature-based solutions over Africa. And it's important to recognize that these aren't innocent processes, but they're rather embedded in our politics around whose interests count and whose knowledge is considered valid. Furthermore, this leads to a kind of ramping up of ambition that we've seen with respect to the multiple trillion trees campaigns and the bond campaign. But rather than being cause for celebration, there's a degree of nervousness around this with the history of, well-documented history of kind of green land grabs and colonialism. And I think fundamentally, a lot of the knowledge at the moment that's being produced obscures rather than clarifies the conflicting interests and trade-offs involved in governing natural climate solutions. Key among those are the institutions, particularly around land rights. Yeah, we've heard a lot about the importance of land tenure, but there isn't really any simple relationship between land tenure and land management decisions, and there's no, there's a lot of concern actually that formalization of customary land rights can actually entrench inequalities. So fundamentally, I think the context is really about framing natural climate solutions as about navigating conflicts rather than trying to deliver win-wins. So how might we respond to this context? I think I've kind of tried to create an ABC framework for this, and I think whatever area of natural climate solutions you're working in, these elements are key to trying to bring governance issues front and center of what we're doing, whether it's in ecological work, economics, or policy. So A is for access. It's critical that we think and understand who can access the financial and non-financial benefits from natural climate solutions, who can access the decision-making processes on natural climate solutions. And it's really important to disaggregate these questions across scales, across genders, across kind of social groups, to mitigate the risk of further entrenching inequality. Similarly, B, burden sharing. It's vital that we understand how the costs associated with delivering natural climate solutions are distributed. It's important instrumentally with respect to the effectiveness of these schemes, but also ethically with how equity is kind of addressed through these schemes. And again, it's really important to disaggregate these across scales. And finally, C, resisting co-option. There was an interesting conversation in the very first session of this conference on the risk of NCS being co-opted, for example, by fossil fuel companies looking just to extend the status quo. And I have a kind of working hypothesis that it's that the kind of best strategy for resisting co-option is providing or working with NCS in a much more politically contextualized way that identifies real actors, how rights, responsibilities are distributed in interests and incentives, and how our work feeds into those, as well as the kind of distribution of costs, benefits, and opportunities associated with NCS in a very concrete and tangible way, rather than talking about NCS in kind of very abstract terms. So yeah, that's just a quick summary of my thoughts. I'd be very happy to take questions or interact with anyone. In my my details I think are around. I can post them. Thanks.
Mark, thank you. Yes, well, the poster will also be online, and we're happy to please post your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them now, or if not, then after. We only have 10 minutes, but Mark, you know, I want to talk about, to you specifically, I want to talk about this issue of power because it affects all sorts of issues that we've discussed throughout the 3 days. It affects measurements. It affects, you know, these decision-making processes that were mentioned at the start of the discussion by Mario. So, you know, in bold here on your poster, it says we need a politically contextualized approach to NCS to avoid co-option, and co-option fundamentally is about power. So, you know, can you just elaborate a little bit about, do you have any thoughts on how this could take place? I mean, obviously it's not my expertise, so I would really like to hear from you what your thoughts are on how we can implement a more politically contextualized approach.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I guess one of the key audiences for this message would be people, researchers working on this, and so I think there's a need to really keep pushing on the interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity way of approaches to understanding NCS. And yeah, so I think in my kind of more provocative moments, sometimes I think if you're doing research on NCS and you can't say anything about, for example, the distribution of access or the distribution of burden sharing, then think about whether this is the right stage to really push that research out, or whether it's time to try and build a collaboration so that you can actually say something meaningful about this political context and so the political implications of your work. So yeah, I think in summary, I think interdisciplinary ways, there's a lot of work within kind of a number of different disciplines that engage with power, political ecology being one of the key ones. And so I think there's a lot of scope actually for trying to build on those kind of collaborations. It's speaking from experience, it's extremely hard work to do, but I think it is a kind of critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm very interested in this, and now I think, yeah, we just have we don't have that much more time. I think we have about 6 or so minutes left. I want to follow up to this discussion point on the value of these issues of power, the need for interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity through engagement processes with policymakers and practitioners. We've heard this. I guess I'll ask everyone, starting with Mario. We've discussed quite a bit throughout these 3 days about the need to encompass a diversity of knowledges. It's often said, but perhaps not always appreciated how power issues and power dynamics affects which knowledges are considered, even if we have good intentions. So Mario, since you worked on decision-making processes at the local scale, you had a very close look at how they develop and how people change their opinions based on these discussions. Can you share your thoughts on that, and then I'll extend the question to the other participants.
Yes, just to understand your questions, you mean how they change their opinions when we integrate knowledge, you mean?
Yeah, how can we better be aware of how these power dynamics might influence that process, and how can we ensure that indeed a diversity of views are considered?
Well, I think it's important that stakeholders or actors which are involved in a decision-making process get the chance to reflect their own opinion and their own beliefs and values, but also get to know the beliefs and values of others, the opinions of others. I think science, for example, I think it's plays a big role there, because especially about what is true or not, how we use nature or not, I think there science can make a big contribution to put new facts and new evidence in the discussion and help them to reflect their own mindset. I hope I could answer your question.
Yeah, thank you. I guess having these spaces to express these ideas is very important. Perhaps, Sai, do you have any thoughts on that front? Since you've talked about these, I guess these spaces for co-creation or co-production or in these designs.
Sure. I think one of the major barriers might be the knowledge barriers or expertise that, for example, can hinder a truly transdisciplinary approach for bringing in communities and taking their voice on board. And one of the things that we can actually start thinking about is capacity building through using, for example, tools that community can quickly learn how to work with. And a good example that comes into my mind is, for example, a tool that in Brussels they are using in the Brussels project, which is called Map It, where communities with no expertise can actually map their hydrological communities by just putting in a couple of data, their local knowledge about how their neighborhood is being affected by flooding, and just with very simple tools that is accessible to everyone. And then that knowledge can then go to a higher level of conversation with expertise. So I feel that capacity building and using tools that can be shared and accessible to everyone to input data from broader community is really important when we think about these co-creation and collaboration.
Thank you. Yes, that's fantastic. And you mentioned transdisciplinarity. So this idea of going beyond interdisciplinarity to working with research users or practitioners, and I think this also applies to Allison's presentation, because she discussed the step 2, to engage with at a higher scale, but to engage with I guess decision makers to learn more about what particular policies may work and to draw out learning lessons for other countries. Allison, do you have any thoughts on that front?
I probably will have more once we've gone through the qualitative assessment phase. One thought that I did have on this question is, at the international level, I feel like the SDG indicator framework is providing a framework for all countries to monitor and report on their indicators. So in that way, I think it's nice, and it's creating kind of like it's leveling up the playing field, perhaps, in terms of like bringing countries that perhaps wouldn't be systematically monitoring or reporting data before, bringing data from 193 countries into one place, and therefore potentially making it easier to have international discussions about what's going on in terms of sustainable development internationally.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Allison. And Annika, I mean, we've heard this idea, and also in other panels of creating connectivity between different groups to promote learning. And it seems it would be highly relevant also for the NAP process. Is there anything on that front that you can share with us? And you mentioned 19 are submitted, that the process is ongoing, but very briefly, 30 seconds, if you could just tell us any thoughts on that front.
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at the NAP technical guidelines that have been developed by the UNFCCC and the least developed countries expert group, it reinforces the call for it needs to be gender responsive, it needs to include indigenous knowledge, it needs to include vulnerable groups, and different, it needs to be acknowledged social diversity within a country to ensure that adaptation measures are not undermining certain groups or developed in a way that they don't include their views. And I think that is one of the features that takes a long time, and that's why we see some of these NAP processes going on over a number of years. And I think actually earlier Rosa from Peru, the Peruvian process is very interesting in the way they used the NDC and included adaptation as part of their NDC, and the process they used based on those principles of ensuring following these processes that we have socially inclusive participation in those national processes.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I think that's a great place to end it. We have to wrap up. So thank you to all the presenters. I think it really enforces a central theme in these dialogues that really people are at the core of these nature-based solutions across scales, from design implementation to identifying policy solutions. So I just want to leave it right there and let you all know that to please stay tuned for the final keynote presentation by Cristina Figueres. Thank you to all of the poster presenters.
Welcome back, everyone. We have now come to the third and closing keynotes of Nature-Based Solutions Digital Dialogues 2020. What a privilege it is to be welcoming and introducing someone who will be very familiar to you all, and whose role in shifting the dial on climate change collaboration and ambition has been transformative. Cristina Figueres is a Costa Rican citizen and an internationally recognized leader on climate change. She was Executive Secretary of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change from 2010 to 2016. During her tenure at the UNFCCC, Cristina brought together national and subnational governments, corporations and activists, financial institutions and NGOs to jointly deliver the historic Paris Agreement on climate change, in which 195 sovereign states agreed on a collaborative path forward to limit future global warming to well below 2 degrees and strive for 1.5 degrees in order to protect the most vulnerable. For this achievement, Cristina has been credited with forging a brand new type of collaborative diplomacy and has received multiple awards. Since then, she has continued to accelerate the global response to climate change. Today, Cristina is the co-founder of Global Optimism, co-host of the podcast Outrage and Optimism, and is co-author of the recently published book, The Future We Choose, Surviving the Climate Crisis. Cristina sits on multiple executive and advisory boards and is a frequent public speaker and media commentator. She is a graduate of Swarthmore College and the London School of Economics. She lives in Costa Rica and has 2 fantastic daughters. Thank you so much, Cristina. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And can I first start by congratulating Natalie on behalf of all of us for organizing this very, very comprehensive inquiry into nature-based solutions over 3 days. And the fact that over 3 days, you still have, and I'm looking at the numbers, 149 participants is honestly radical success. So congratulations for that. But also, Natalie, congratulations, as I said before, for the very comprehensive nature of everything that you have been focusing on over the past 3 days. Feels like 3 years, I'm sure, to many people sitting at home. I studied your agenda and I saw that you started with benefits of protecting and restoring nature, of course. Then and even without climate change, which I thought was very helpful to look at both the climate benefits, but also even if we didn't have climate, which we most certainly do, even as a standalone concentration of our efforts, what all of the benefits are. That you then also talked about the need to include all ecosystems in this effort, that you then focused on the climate change benefits, both mitigation and adaptation, and the critical role that is played by people, especially those who are closest to all of these areas. And they're closest both in proximity, in physical proximity, but also closest in wisdom, because they understand so much more than we who have grown up at a physical distance from most of the natural ecosystems, sadly. You then also talked about the need for these activities to be ecologically sound, about the importance of good governance, and finally about finance. So as I say, really a very comprehensive tour de force of all of the components that need to be in our view, almost as though this were a kaleidoscope and we're constantly moving that little tube so that we see all the pieces and how they fit together. If there was one aspect that I think was actually missing, but you would then have to add a whole fourth day, and I'm sure you didn't want to do that, is the whole, I would say, universe of the emotional support that we humans get from nature, the psychological benefits, the medical benefits that we get from just walking in a forest. And the Japanese are quite famous for their bathing in the forest, which is just barely walking in a forest. And of course, everything to do with the spiritual inspiration that so many cultures, both traditional but also current cultures, imbibe from their closeness and their understanding of nature. So a whole chapter there still to be explored should you want to do another of these comprehensive inquiries in the future. To all of the topics that have been delved into in such rigorous detail, I just wanted to add three, let me call them macro thoughts. The first is that while we are still only at the beginning of understanding the very, very intricate nature of nature, how everything is interdependent, including our species, which is only one species in the entire web of species of nature, while we're only at the beginning of understanding that, the complexity of that and the intricacy and the interconnectedness, it is actually very urgent that we speed up our understanding of that. Because as many of you have discussed, we're actually losing much of the intricacy and losing very, very key pieces of that puzzle. And so it is very urgent that we acquire, through activities such as this, acquire the knowledge from each other to understand that intricacy and that interconnectedness. The second thought that I wanted to leave with you is that while each of the aspects that you have discussed over the past 3 days stand alone and are equally as important one to the other, the fact is that together, and only together, do they magnify the complexity of both the solutions that we need to work toward, as well as the importance of getting those solutions right. So we're operating in two realities here at the same time. Each of these aspects that you have delved into stands on its own right, stands on its own feet, but it is really through understanding them together and their interplay that we can understand the complexity and the importance of getting it right. And the third idea that I wanted to share with you is that because of the depth of the knowledge that we still don't have, but that we are gathering, it is very possible that each of these aspects that you have discussed has to be addressed by a different institution, a different center of expertise, different organizations in different geographies, because it will be different in each geography, in each ecosystem. So we do have to open up for specificity, necessary specificity that has to be there, both in the focus of our attention as well as in who is paying that attention. However, all of that cannot be done independently of each other. We cannot lock ourselves into silos per ecosystem or per geography or per area of expertise, because we will then not benefit from the full view and from so many of the interlinkages and the interplays that are there in that fantastic complexity of the web of nature. And hence, we do, as we move forward, and very much in the spirit of this 3-day inquiry, have to be inspired and guided by the interconnectedness of that web of nature, and understand that that interconnectedness of the web of nature is not just something for us to observe and study, but actually something for us to emulate, because it is that interconnectedness of us humans and all of our efforts that is going to actually make a difference. The summary of those 3 points, I would like to say, is that our greatest challenge going forward as we engage in all of these nature-based solutions is certainly what we do, but most importantly, it's how we do it. So not just what we're paying attention to, but how we pay attention to it, how we interact with each other, and how do we collaborate with each other in good imitation of the interconnectedness of the web of nature. And I didn't want to extend these words too long, because you've all been in front of your computers and in front of your screens for just an inordinate number of hours. But I did just want to leave those 3 points and a quick wrap up with you. And with that, let me just again thank Natalie and her whole team for having pulled together so many of you to really begin to unpack, but then repack all of the different efforts that are currently underway, and that we know have to now progress not on an incremental or linear way, but rather exponential, both in speed as well as in complexity and interconnectedness. So with that, Natalie, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to join you here quite at the end. And above all, thanks to everyone who had the staying power to still be on and to listen to your closing remarks, Natalie.
Thank you very much, Christiana. Absolutely wonderful to have you saying those words as we close. If you wouldn't mind, I do have a couple of questions before I move on to my wrap up.
Sure.
I ask them. You have such a long experience with negotiations and with the whole climate change space. And why isn't, a lot of people are asking, and they've asked on a number of panels, like, why is now different? What's different about now? We've had similar movements, 20 years ago, that ultimately didn't really shift the dial on ambition for nature and the relationship between the climate and nature. What do you see as the key thing that differentiates this time now, and how can we really seize this opportunity we have, especially given what's happened to us with the pandemic?
I think there are many reasons for that, but let me just start by saying I think there is a deepening and growing awareness of the fact that we're about to drop off the precipice. And I know that we've been saying this for many years, if not decades, but now we truly, truly are. And I think, as we stand there on the precipice and look down, I think there has been a huge realization of, oh my gosh, what have we been blind to? And that, I think, goes for all climate and biodiversity action. Specifically to nature-based solutions, I think there are a couple of things that have occurred in the past maybe 2 years that have been mutually reinforcing. The first, and I'll try to go sequentially, but maybe not actually be able to be so sequential. The first in my recollection, was the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees that came out in October 2 years ago. That was the most defining report on climate for sure. It was the most granular report that we had ever seen. We had never really understood the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. We thought half a degree is no big deal. And that report made us all stand up and realize that half a degree is actually the difference between one world and a completely different world. And that report made it abundantly clear that yes, we have to work on energy emissions and bring them down to zero, but also we have to work on the 30% of emissions that come from nature, from land use and from water. And that above and beyond that, we also have to nurture the possibilities of negative emissions, which for some people are negative emissions with industrial carbon sequestration. For me, it's negative emissions through natural carbon absorption. But that was a huge hit on the head that we all got, that, whoa, not only is it the 30% of emissions, it is actually even more than that. So I think that was a huge wake-up call for everyone. Then the fact that this year we were supposed to have both the Biodiversity Convention as well as the Climate Convention coming up to a huge head, and all the information that has been shared about the urgency of coming to an agreement on protection of biodiversity also helped an incredible amount. And thirdly, although there are many others, but I don't want to extend too long, I think the COVID crisis has actually helped, because all of us who are locked up in our homes, and I can see, you know, from the viewings that most of us are in our homes, you know, the one thing that we're craving, two things. We're craving going out and giving people we love a big hug, and we're craving walking in the forest, walking along the stream, hugging a tree, rolling in the grass. We're craving nature. We're so craving nature. And we have understood that nature is actually at the basis of our life. We've understood that every single drop of water that we drink, and we don't last very long without water, comes from nature. Every single molecule of oxygen that we breathe, and we don't survive very long without oxygen, comes from nature. And most of our food comes from nature, and more is going to come from nature. And so I think, you know, we have totally understood now during this period, which has been a huge period of pause and reflection and meditation on where are we and who do we want to be as a society. We've had, you know, huge revelations, most of which, if not all, have been very good for us, have pulled the rug from under our previous legacy thinking, and have catapulted us into, I think, a new level of understanding. Maybe that's too optimistic, but, you know, Natalie, I'm optimistic.
Yes, and we love you for and are inspired greatly by your optimism. And I think the nature-based solutions community is generally a pretty optimistic community. But the nature-based solutions community has grown enormously in recent months, hasn't it? And as things get very big and as communities grow, there's also a tendency for fragmentation. And I sometimes get the sense that the nature-based solutions community is fragmenting a little bit. So I don't know, it might be a tough question, but what do you think are the key actions that we need to try and bring this community together so that we're all, you know, singing with the same voice?
Well, I think you need to answer that question, Natalie, because this is definitely in your bailiwick. Let me address though the fragmentation issue, okay? Because you asked, what do we need to focus on? And so I will leave that, I'm sure, to your closing words. But to the fragmentation, you know, it strikes me that there's two ways of looking at fragmentation. We can look at fragmentation as being unhelpful because we might go into silo thinking, silo acting, as I was talking before. But we could also look at fragmentation from a different perspective and understand that, as you said, because this nature-based solution area has attracted now so much interest, so many brains, so much expertise, so much enthusiasm, so much commitment, this is a good thing. And so what we're actually seeing is 1,000 flowers blooming. And in a small garden, you can probably keep an inventory of, you know, how many roses or how many calendulas are growing or how many heads of lettuce are coming out of the vegetable garden or whatever. But once you get a huge garden, you lose track of how many plants are growing. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I have completely lost track of everything that people are doing on the more traditional side of climate, which is on the energy side. I used to know most everybody who was working on that. I don't anymore. That's a good thing. Because if I knew everyone, we would actually be in a very, very bad situation, because we know that this cannot be only the purview of experts and those who are devoting their life to this. This has to be normalized. This has to be something that not just experts, but every single human being is actually contributing to. And so fragmentation may not be a bad idea, as long as what it actually means is that we're normalizing the interest and the commitment to these issues.
Thank you so much. I absolutely agree. I've also stopped trying to keep track of all the plants, and it is blooming very merrily now. And I think there have been many people on this call over the last few days really engaged with us, and it's been a very, very thrilling few days. But thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to have.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you very much, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much. So we've now come to the end of Nature-Based Solutions Digital Dialogues 2020. And it is going to be difficult to summarize such an invigorating few days of talks. I'd like to thank all of you who have taken the journey with us over these days and who have engaged with questions and comments, and an especially heartfelt thanks to all our brilliant speakers, panelists, poster presenters and moderators. Thank you for finding the time and all the energy to share your diverse views and all your work with us. And I will just switch to share my screen now. So in addition to thanking all of the participants, I want to also thank our Twitter reporters, especially Youth for Nature, and of course, many thanks to the brilliant Nature-Based Solutions team for their work convening and organising this event. To Cécile Girardin, Alex Rosson and Stephen Waronecki for convening and moderating our wonderful poster sessions, for Beth Turner and Megan McGillivray for much work behind the scenes, and especially to Izzy Key and Dan Seddon, who have worked so tirelessly and enthusiastically over the past few months, and who have worked very intensively behind the scenes over the past 3 days, troubleshooting all manner of technical challenges. Running a conference online certainly brings a lot of challenges and still feels to many of us somewhat alien, but it also brings many joys. In the end, we had over 720 people register and tune in at various times over the last 3 days. This is more than twice as many people as we would have been able to host at a meeting in Oxford. Moreover, the speakers and audience were global. In fact, quite a small proportion, around approximately 10%, came from the UK. And we are very proud to have hosted such a dynamic event with such a global reach, and yet had to have a very low carbon footprint. So remote meeting is currently a necessity, but as we move beyond COVID-19, so it must become the norm. We all have to stop flying around at the drop of a hat, that much is clear. Each flight, I believe, must be rigorously justified and extremely carefully offset, as panel 1 on the day 1 of this conference explained. And so next year, it is our ambition to host a hybrid event, one that fully integrates both in-person and remote participation, one that discourages flying entirely whilst enabling participation globally. Let's work as a community to really change the zeitgeist on this issue out of respect for each other, for nature and for future generations who really do need to inherit a much healthier planet. But where do we want to be in 12 months' time? Where do we want to be ahead of all the big meetings next year? Well, what the last 3 days have clearly shown us is that we all do have our work cut out for us, of course, and that we will only achieve our ultimate goal to take nature-based solutions to scale if we work together as much in our research as in our communications. So this event, Nature-Based Solutions Digital Dialogues, had two main goals. The first was to merge with a better shared understanding of the values and limits to nature-based solution and what's needed in terms of knowledge, enablers, finance, and governance to scale them up. And the second was to foster greater collaboration and encourage us all to be more united in our efforts to scale up and scale out successful, sustainable nature-based solutions. So over the next few minutes, I don't want to take up too much time with this, as I appreciate that we are all quite tired after 3 long days. But I want to give a brief resume of what we covered and what critical actions are now needed. So we started with a dazzling keynote from Masunda Mumba. She emphasized that we can make substantial progress towards addressing the interlinked socio-environmental issues of climate change, biodiversity loss, and poverty by supporting women, by supporting the youth and the development of environmentally sustainable landscaping, entrepreneurship jobs, green jobs, and so forth, by rethinking our agroecological systems. Intensive modes of productions degrade landscapes and do not produce nutritious foods at the end of the day. She also highlighted our need to reduce consumption and also to accept uncertainty. She emphasized how the world's peoples need to recognize that their fates are intertwined. COVID has made that obvious, as does climate change. Therefore, we need to view ourselves as a collective and work together. The future is very uncertain, so we need to be adaptable as well as resilient, as do our landscapes. And identifying and enabling integrated solutions, portfolios of solutions, is absolutely crucial. So the first session, panel 1, addressed the complex issue of carbon offsetting. This panel explored how much nature-based solutions can contribute to climate change mitigation in a context that's relevant to the goals of the Paris Agreement. And it concluded that the deployment of nature-based solutions is very time sensitive. The session highlighted that the protection of stable, intact ecosystems and better management of working lands would make the biggest contribution to climate change mitigation, highlighting that we need to invest in nature intensively now for staying well below 2 degrees and for long-term cooling, as well as all the other societal benefits about which we've been hearing so much. Panel 1 also debated the moral hazards of carbon offsetting. You know, nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions have the potential to offset emissions from the agricultural sector, but we absolutely cannot rely on nature-based solutions to offset emissions from other sectors. Yet, current financing for nature-based solutions does not reflect their contribution as a mitigation option, and most funding with the current state of affairs will come from the carbon market. But we do need, and this was heavily emphasized by the panelists, that we need to constrain the use of nature-based solutions as offsets to ensure that industry remains deeply committed to decarbonising their systems. At the same time, we don't want to sideline nature-based solutions. The session also quantified the extent to which the recent focus on expanding forests for rapid carbon gains could be counterproductive to climate goals, and demonstrated the importance of forests, natural ecosystems other than forests, and in particular highlighted the need to focus on nature-based solutions that increase soil carbon sequestration. It won't require more land, it sequesters more carbon on a long scale and provides a very wide range of ecological and socioeconomic benefits. In panel 2, there was a great discussion around how important it is to think about other non-forest ecosystems, not only because they are important for climate change mitigation and for providing, you know, critical ecosystem services, but because the broader landscape in which forests are embedded are very important. Forests often act as the kind of the connective tissue across landscapes and need to be viewed in this way. This panel, which included discussions of perspectives from marine and coastal, as well as inland ecosystems and the dry lands, the great green wall of Africa, really highlighted that effectiveness is really found at the local level, often measured at the local level, but local, regional, national, and international involvement are needed all at the same time. In other words, we need a system where bottom-up approaches meet top-down. Effective nature-based solutions need to have local people involved, absolutely front and center. They need to be consulted and have ownership over projects, at the same time as being supported by the government in different ways, whether through finance, legislation, or technical support. Now, small scale, as I say, small scale interventions can be effective at the local level, but they can scale out to deliver benefits at a much larger scale, and a lot of work is needed on what enables that scaling out across landscapes. But the issue is, of course, and we have to bear this in mind, that nature-based solutions won't be long-term, a viable option in the long term, because they're impacted by global activities that are way outside their control. So we need, and we will return to this, systemic transformation in trade, production, and consumption. When it came to the second keynote, we had a wonderful keynote from Sandra Lavarelle, very insightful. We learned that whilst we know that nature contributes mitigation and adaptation benefits, these can be enhanced through management, which can also decrease the risks from the fact that nature itself is very vulnerable to climate change. And this is a point that comes up time and time again. We need to take into account the impacts of climate change on the ecosystem's capacity to deliver all these benefits. But by finding key leverage points in the socio-ecological system, management can deliver bundles of benefits and address multiple hazards, which really does reflect the reality that people are facing. At the same time, different management options will lead to different adaptation outcomes. So enabling and supporting communities to make these assessments is key, although we have to remember that many communities already have very good methods for doing so, and we have a lot to learn from those communities. At the end of the day, again, because of the uncertainty of climate change and other hazards, the best options will be those that maximize adaptive capacity and resilience. As such, they can handle this variability. In panel 3, we learnt that, well, all sorts of things, but we learnt that to be effective and successful, nature-based solutions need to be transformative. So meaning that we cannot make the same mistakes as past green agendas have done, that have dichotomized people and nature, and in particular, that have excluded indigenous peoples and their rights. Nature-based solutions only works when the local people are empowered and engaged, and therefore we need to break barriers that are causing their oppression and inequality. Key to this is securing land rights, giving them a voice in decision-making, incorporating their own solutions, and showing that their own actions matter and building their confidence. At the same time, of course, there are key roles for other actors. Governments, we rely on governments for policies and legislation to safeguard local people's actions in the long term, and inclusion of locals in decision-making and to provide finances. Researchers are needed of all different types, social and natural and physical scientists working together to share knowledge and work with local knowledge to develop solutions. The private sector is needed for finance, and of course NGOs from the development and conservation sectors can facilitate between actors and can provide financial and technical support. Finally, there was consensus among our speakers from across diverse contexts that barriers to implementation can be overcome by different means, such as talking in a common language, showing that all actors are interested in the same objectives, presenting concrete facts that would result from different actions, in other words, demonstrating the benefits of nature-based solutions, getting to the root cause of the barrier to implementation, such as cultural values, and of course, a great deal of patience is always needed. In panel 4, we explored the fundamental importance of biodiversity as a key outcome of successful, sustainable nature-based solutions, but also as a fundamental property. We explored the relationship between those different positions of biodiversity in the nature-based solutions framework. As I've said before, nature-based solutions will only work if we consider the future effects of climate change, and it's important, therefore, that we consider genetic diversity, and we have to think of different management implications. So we may need to intervene in some situations using assisted migration or by using plantations of key species. Biodiversity indicators, so a really important much more work is needed to evaluate the outcomes for biodiversity and measure the outcomes using a suite of biodiversity indicators of interventions for, say, adaptation or mitigation. These are instrumental for governments assessing nature-based solutions as a tool to meet climate commitments, and of course, for companies to see the impacts of their investment, and that feeds into the narrative about science-based targets that we discussed today. And we need new tools to measure biodiversity outcomes. We can look at ecological integrity, GIS, and remote sensing, for example, to estimate diversity or biodiversity, even vegetation cover. But of course, targets that are as quantifiable as climate change mitigation goals are inherently more demanding. In the session, we also discussed the importance of social resilience and the interplay between ecological and social resilience. And then we moved on to talk about, the issue that for nature-based solutions to have the same standing with the conventional biological diversity as it does with United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, we must agree on how we measure and also how we communicate the value of nature-based solutions for biodiversity. But nature-based solutions have the potential to provide a switch in paradigm from defensive conservation to proactive projects. Today, we started with a very powerful intervention in the form of Justin Adams' presentation. Justin highlighted 5 key points on what the nature-based solutions community needs to do to make sure we use the present window of opportunity we have. And his points were more or less endorsed during the excellent panel discussion. So I think it's useful to frame the outcomes of that discussion in terms of his 5 points. The first is that we need to build a strong, so this is a session on financing nature-based solutions and what it will take to mobilize the sustainable flows of finance. The first is that we need to build a strong and relevant narrative. At the moment, jobs and economic opportunities are a key issue. We need to put forward a strong case of how nature-based solutions delivers on this and have consistent messaging coming from the nature-based solutions community. Often debate amongst ourselves can add confusion to the broader issue. So we need to embrace the complexity in the research, but be very clear on our messaging to decision makers. We need to clarify the pathways for how policymakers and businesses can build a nature positive economy. And we need to, changes is needed in the global south as much as it in the global north, sorry, as much as it is in the global south. And nature-based solutions finance needs to be channeled for nature-based solutions for adaptation and resilience, not only mitigation. So we really do need to bring the narrative around nature-based solutions back to these holistic benefits, especially adaptation, resilience, and biodiversity. We need better and different metrics for nature-based solutions, so not just economic metrics. And we need to rethink how we measure progress and value in ways that are better aligned with the benefits we need. The systemic shift to consider social and ecological values is needed, and not just economic values and short-term profit or efficiency and so forth. Closing the gap is vitally important, of course, mobilizing finance from carbon and also ecosystem service markets that will unlock funding sources that have been previously unavailable to us. So something that was highlighted was the need to redirect agricultural subsidies that destroy nature to invest in nature positive activities. And the COVID recovery phase, of course, presents a huge window of opportunity to finance nature-based solutions globally, within cities, and also always recognizing the role of ecosystems in cities as crucial for infrastructure for human well-being and health. And the current pandemic has definitely revealed that to us as being very important. And finally, we must address, absolutely very fundamentally, must address equity and inclusion. Without addressing this fundamental and underlying challenge, nature-based solutions won't work. And this includes marginalized communities, city dwellers, indigenous communities, as well as farmers and foresters. Nature-based solutions has the opportunity to lead the transformation towards greater social justice. And in the final session this afternoon, we discussed, issues around governing nature-based solutions, highlighting successes in different countries, in Peru, Bangladesh, and the UK. It was recognized that now is a window of opportunity. Government and the private sector are open to nature-based solutions. So it's crucial now for the nature-based solutions community to demonstrate to decision makers what nature-based solutions are in a practical sense. We need to use this opportunity now to unlock nature-based solutions into long-term government planning. And we have seen this deliver effective nature-based solutions in the past. Nature-based solutions is relevant for all government sectors, and that's a very important thing. The key thing is to engage, the most influential ministries, the Ministry of Finance in particular. And it is key to have a space for these different sectors to communicate amongst themselves and to allow NbS integration into their own sectors to help meet climate and biodiversity goals, as well as their own priorities, so aligning those priorities within and between those sectors. There was much discussion about how we measure natural capital. The currently measurements of natural capital were described as not being fit for purpose. There's a huge undervaluing of nature, but as we know from the panel session 5, huge progress has been made in improving the measurement of natural assets and natural capital in general. We need to move beyond trying to value ecosystem flowing from natural assets, instead look at costs of maintaining and restoring the integrity of natural assets that provide these services. And at the international level, nature-based solutions can link the goals of the UNFCCC and the CBD in terms of actions, if not in writing of legislation. And finally, it was highlighted that there needs to be global solidarity between the groups practicing nature-based solutions, and this will be a force to be reckoned with. So to conclude, the current pandemic has done much damage and many continue to suffer, especially the most poor and marginalized people across the world. But it has highlighted to us the scale of the change needed to put us on a sustainable trajectory and the degree of radical transformation needed in all our lives. Though daunting, it has shown us what is possible and what needs to be done. There's been much talk of seizing the moment to hike up climate ambition and a growth in awareness of the vitally important role of nature in economic recovery. Indeed, in this meeting, we have seen that nature-based solutions have huge potential to help us build back better in cities and rural areas alike. Not only will protecting and restoring natural systems buffer us and increase resilience against new pathogens, as well as climate change impacts, but also through the provision of much needed jobs. So it's a vision wherein as we restore our ecosystems and working lands, as we bring nature into cities, so we will restore our livelihoods and our health and our children's opportunities. And it's on this basis that we can engage ministries and business leaders and secure finance flows, providing we measure things better and communicate more clearly. In this way, nature-based solutions provides us with a positive vision of the future, and we have seen so many great examples of this from all over the world over the past few days. As such, nature-based solution can be viewed as a vehicle to get us onto a sustainable path. Once we're there, we won't need to label them as such anymore because we will already be doing the right thing. Nature-based solutions emerged from the major paradigm shift that took place in the late 2000s that involved a move away from conserving nature for its own sake to conserving nature for people's sake. A decade later, nature-based solutions could play a key role in enabling another and even more fundamental paradigm shift, one that is being fast-tracked by the current pandemic. This is, of course, the transformation of a destructive global economic model that ignores nature's immeasurable value to people to one where a healthy economy is defined by the social and ecological well-being it brings. For nature-based solutions to play this role, it's vital to get the message right about what they are, to avoid polarized debates and agendas that separate people from nature, that pitch technology against green solutions, or that deter robust private and public investment. So we must get better at communicating as well as communicating about as well as measuring nature's value, working together as a community of scientists, policymakers, and practitioners to coordinate and harmonize our efforts as we work towards a successful COP15, COP26, and of course beyond. And it is in the spirit of collaboration and harmony that we close Nature-Based Solutions Digital Dialogues 2020. Thank you all for your engagement. Good luck in all your amazing efforts. Keep in touch. And we very much look forward to welcoming you both in person and online in 12 months' time. Goodbye.